Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Culture and Coffee Podcast with me, Colin Ellis, for Monday, the 7th of August, 2023. It's flying by. She is absolutely flying by. My wife and I yesterday were making plans for December and realised that it's really not that far off December. So there's your depressing start to the day, that time is flying and we haven't got much of it left. Which also applies to this podcast. I'm going to get straight into it today. I really am. I'm not going to waste any time. Today's coffee is, and I already got sidetracked. I spoke to 3 people last week at various events, all of whom listened to the podcast. So I did want to start by saying a huge thank you to everybody that does actually take the time to listen to this. And I know 2 of the 3 just want me to rattle through the coffee and get to the culture bit. So I'm going to do that today. You know who you are. The 2 people who I spoke to last week, it was like, yeah, the coffee bit's all right, but I was like, okay, I get it. But listen, I'm doing the coffee thing. Like, yes, I think I mentioned this at the start for any new listeners. Why the coffee thing? Well, firstly, I really like coffee, and and you can't drink whiskey first thing on a Monday morning. Well, you can. It's just you got to probably. That would be a problem that I would need to talk to somebody about, I would think. But I do like a coffee. Not that our bodies need a coffee first thing in the morning. If you've done the thing that every adult should do and put themselves to bed at a reasonable hour, you don't necessarily need a coffee first thing. It's just part of my little ritual is to, grind some coffee, stick it in the hopper and create it in the Mocha Master. I love a good filter coffee in the morning. It's very un-British of me. I should really be having a cup of tea, and there's always time for a cup of tea. I like a cup of tea in an afternoon. I don't really like to drink coffee probably after 12:30-ish. Sometimes if I feel a little short-term pick-me-up to either finish writing something, then I will do that. Yeah, so I thought, well, it can't just be me talking about culture. There has to be another thing maybe to interest. I don't know. Maybe you're the same. You're like, you know what? I agree with those other 2 people. But I really liked Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. And of course, this is definitely not as interesting as that. Which I'm saying for Jerry Seinfeld's benefit, because I know he's a regular listener. Yeah, so that was a little bit of my inspiration. So anyway, today's coffee, now I'm mentioning it, is a Pedro Flores, which is a great name. I wish that was my name. Is a Pedro Flores from Caranavi in Bolivia. So Bolivia doesn't often feature on the podcast. So it's from Bolivia, roasted by Market Lane Coffee, which I procured from the vending machine, which is just something that I love doing. I love buying coffee from the vending machine. Don't get me wrong. I love going in the coffee shop and, getting someone to recommend something. But every now and again, you just need to buy something from a vending machine. And this being Melbourne, it's not a Mars bar or a can of pop. It's coffee. So yes, it's got notes of red apple with caramel and walnuts. Let's give this a go. Burnt my mouth. Way too big a drink. Sip of that. Burnt my mouth. Hang on a minute. Yeah. I mean, I'm getting the caramel. Some days I'm not going to lie and be all pretentious like, oh, every day I've got this perfect coffee palate, man. And I can really get the notes. Like I get a bit of caramel sweetness there, but yeah, not a lot else there. Red apple and caramel, honestly, just makes me think of toffee apples. Yeah, a toffee apple. Like it's part of your one piece of fruit a day, but it's just covered in sugar, which really is the best way to eat fruit. Anyway, first episode of this podcast was actually 3 years ago this week. And I started it. I told you about the Comedians in Cars with coffee thing. But obviously we were kind of in the pandemic, and at that time I was trying to give away as much kind of knowledge as I possibly could, because I really felt that there was a kind of thirst for knowledge, and people were consuming lots of video content, but also audio content. And I do lots of videos. For those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, I do loads of that stuff. I've got a YouTube channel full of videos. And so I thought, well, I'll just start doing a podcast as well. And I hope you enjoy it, because it's just a little bit of something that I can give you 3 years ago. But my very first podcast, I asked a bunch of people, I'm going to start a podcast. What do you want me to cover? And a load of people said email. And email and meetings are still the two biggest challenges facing most corporates. Not the sports teams that I work with who don't understand why emails and meetings are a problem, which I totally get. But for most corporates, the email and meetings, so the things they do to themselves, are still the two biggest challenges. So I had a request. Someone said, could I go back to email and provide some, because they didn't want to scroll down, presumably to something that's 3 years old. Can I do another one on email? Yes, I can. And I've got new content since that 3 years ago, you'll be pleased to know. So the estimates, let's start with some of the facts, right? It's estimated that we send over 300 billion emails a day, and they're expecting that by 2026, so in, I don't know, 2.5 years time, it's going to be almost 400 billion emails a day, which is absolutely just bonkers. It's absolutely crazy, because most of them don't get read. Half of them don't get replied to. Did you get that in your place of work? I have people approaching me saying, oh, we'd really love to work with you. Can you send me a proposal? I'm like, yeah, of course, send them a proposal. Never hear from them ever again. I'm like, what? I mean, obviously, it's a great signifier of the kind of culture you don't want to work with. But not replying to an email is like massively disrespectful. But so often just never ever get replied to, leaving you wondering, like, why do we do this to ourselves? So Radicati, who are really good, actually, I've been following the research for a while. Every time I want a stat on email, I go to Radicati, and I wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review, actually, about, I don't know, I feel like it was about 2 years ago now. Oh my gosh, they make you jump through hoops to write those articles. If anyone's on from Harvard, you do a fantastic job. Thanks so much for the 15,000 drafts that we had to do for that one email article. But of course, what they want to do for Harvard Business Review, they want to make sure that things are thoroughly researched and they're written in the way that their audience would appreciate. And I get it. So maybe I'll share that in the show notes, because I think a lot of what I wrote in there, for those of you who like reading stuff as well, it's still relevant today. It's still relevant today. But there's some new stuff since then. So one statistic that I found, 70% of corporate employees check their email every 6 seconds. Now, before you're like, what? It's not even possible. It totally is. If you're sat at your desk and you've got notifications on, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, you've got notifications on and it pops up in the corner, like if you use Outlook, most people use Outlook, it pops up in the right-hand corner, and you look at it, that's an indication that you've kind of read it. All right. So that you've checked it, because you've checked what that incoming email is. And sometimes you click on it and open up the whole window. Yeah. So almost 3/4 of people check their email every 6 seconds. Some more information. So constantly checking your email in this way does actually, they've proven, scientists, so clever scientists, it reduces your IQ by 10 points. And what that means is that because you get stuck in this loop of always checking, it reduces your ability to make sensible decisions. I wanted to say it turns you into a bit of a dumbass, but that just didn't feel right. But it does. It just reduces your ability to make sensible decisions, reduces your IQ by 10 points. And something that I read about recently, and I'm finishing writing the next book, Detox Your Culture, is this thing called a switch cost effect. And the switch cost effect is the focus. So let's say you're concentrating on writing something, and then you get a notification, go ding, right? And you look at your phone, or you look at your laptop, or you look at the email, right? So the switch cost effect is the focus that you lose when you're switching between things, right? When you lose focus and you shift from one thing to another. So what happens is the brain needs to kind of reconfigure. You're really focusing on one thing, and you kind of get into a bit of a zone. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, talked a lot about flow. It's a great book called Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. There you go. I just said that twice, like I'm promoting the book. And And yeah. So one of the things that he found is, kind of just how it undermined your ability to stay in flow if you got distracted. And of course, if you want to stay in flow, one of the things you should do is remove all distraction. Because of this switch cost effect, because your brain needs to stop focusing on one thing and start focusing on something else. And as a result of the switch cost effect, essentially it kind of breaks your concentration, undermines your performance. It makes you slower in terms of your kind of productivity. You make more mistakes. Creativity is reduced. All because of the fact that you switch between different things. And email is a big part of that. For corporate employees, email is a big part of that. And I read one piece of research that showed that the average millennial and Gen Z worker, so I must have read this in the Deloitte research, spend an average of, this is in corporate employees, spend an average of 3 minutes per task, which is pretty appalling, really. But that's not just the switch cost effect. A large amount of that is the sense of overwhelm or burnout. Do you feel overwhelmed? You know what I mean? Where you've got like too many priorities. I did a session with the leadership team recently, and I asked them to, how many priorities they had as a business at this point in time. And it was double figures, to which I severely scolded them. Of course I did. Because if you've got kind of more than 3 to 5, and this was a small business, if you've got more than 3 to 5 any one time, it's going to really confuse people. They're not going to know what's the most important thing to work on. There was a great article, I think it was in the BBC at the start of this year. This was, it was about the director of the Uffizi Gallery. The Uffizi Gallery is in Florence, in Italy. Have you been there? It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Like, even if you don't like art, well, if you didn't like art, why are you going? Just go and have some pizza instead. But if you don't like art, just like walking around these halls, it's like going to the Louvre in Paris. You walk around all of these corridors and see all this incredible art, like National Gallery. You just can't help but feel overwhelmed by it. But anyway, that's not the point of this. Now I've turned into some kind of, promoter of art. The director of the Uffizi is a German fella called, a German. Is he a guy or is he a girl? I should have really checked that, shouldn't I, before I started talking about this. Eike Schmidt, right? I know the director is called Eike Schmidt. I think it's a fella, and he had a right old rant. If it is a he, if it's a she, I'm terribly, terribly sorry. It's deeply, lacking respect there. Anyway, but he had a right old rant about how emails should be used. Typical bloke, assuming it's a bloke. So I'm just going to now neutralize it. They sent an email. They sent an email on how emails should be used, which I absolutely loved. So it talked about the fact that like capital letters have no place in an email, which is brilliant. And it's part of the problem with email, right? Is that we're not taught how to use it. No, so capitals should only be used for proper names, I think they said. Where it's demanded by grammar. I think that's what they said. Ellipsis, so this is where kind of words are left out but understood, the kind of ... That should be none of that in an email. And the work emails should be, I think they said clear, explicit, but never confusing. I think that's what they said. And like I kind of really enjoyed the fact that they'd sent that email out, but it spoke to a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is, and this is the challenge that you've got with email, and that probably title this How to Reduce Your Email, title this podcast. Because when you join a new organization, they'll train you on things like, I don't know, policy, process. They'll talk you through kind of like elements of the operating model, like the structure. They might even send you something with pictures on of senior managers, like all of which is really useful information, but none of it kind of helps you with your productive time. And actually, if organizations had a bit of a training program on how they use email, it could transform everything. It really, really could. It could transform absolutely everything. And I think that that's something that, kind of high performing cultures do, is they don't get sucked into this vortex of email being the way that you communicate. You know, and I wrote for the Harvard Business Review, and I'll reiterate it here, is email is the worst form of communication. It's the worst form of communication because there's no context, there's no tone. And depending on who you are, your personality, the mood you're in, you can interpret it in a completely different way than it was actually intended. Not only that, you know, kind of people obfuscate and confuse and, you know, kind of, they're just overly verbose when there's just no need to be, instead of keeping it short and sweet. You know, I think that, you know, there's so much productive time that could be gained back if we just trained people on how to use email. So, for example, you know, talk about the fact that there are two kinds of communication tools. There are synchronous tools and asynchronous tools. A synchronous tool is something that demands an immediate response. So often we'll use text messages for synchronous tools. A phone call is a synchronous tool. You know, and for some reason, well, sometimes it's a lack of courage. Sometimes people are just covering their arse, let's face it, when they send emails. Well, I just want to prove that I've sent it to this person. But I think that, you know, it's synchronous tools. It needs a response there and then. And that's not email. Email is an example of an asynchronous tool. Microsoft Teams chat is an asynchronous tool. And what that means is when the person gets round to checking it, then they'll respond or not, however the culture might be in your organization. So, email, you know, when we bring people into the organization, we should let people know that email is an asynchronous tool, which means that when people get to it. And as a result, all email notifications should be turned off. So one of the things I want you to do, as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, unless you're driving, in which case wait until you've parked up, right? I don't want you getting fined by the police or killing someone. Stop checking your phones in your car. It's ridiculous. So whenever you can, is turn off email notifications on the desktop and on the app. You don't need them on. Honestly, you don't need it. It's an asynchronous tool. An email doesn't require an immediate response. Have you ever got an email that the subject line is for immediate action? That's just a demonstration that that person has got no idea how to use email. Even worse, if they put it in capitals. Even worse, Heike Schmidt would be going mad, right? Don't put it, you know, for immediate attention, must action. Like if it's a must action, pick up the phone. But people don't want to do that because it's hard work. I'd rather just send an email and copy 1 million people in. That's another thing that should be part of the training. Copying people in. We copy people in for 2 reasons. You know, cover your arse, prove you're smart. It's usually the 2 reasons why. You know, email's good for sharing information, providing that it's not ambiguous and it's not open to interpretation. So it's fact-based. Just announcing that we have a new CEO starting on Monday. Her name is, this is her background. She's having a welcome drink, all invite. You know, something obviously can't misconstrue it in any way, shape or form. Passing information on like that. Or, you know, kind of sharing things like agendas or actions from agendas. All right, so something action-based. It should never be used for any kind of performance management, never really used for any kind of feedback or, you know, like, you know, we've been able to share documents for years now and people still comment on Word documents and then attach it to an email and copy 1,000 people in. Do you know how dumb that practice is? Absolutely ridiculous. We should be helping employees, and you guys should be helping yourself if you're an employee, to have inbox zero every night. Now, if you've got 3, I want to finish with a couple of tips here. Firstly, learn how to set up rules in Outlook to stop some things ever getting into your inbox. So you can set up a rule. And I would never recommend doing anything that I hadn't done myself or that I'd worked with people and they'd done it, been super successful, right? So set up rules. So every time I got copied into an email, right, I had a rule set up to mark that email as read and put it in a folder, not in an inbox, right? So somebody, you know, thought it a good idea to copy me in. Well, I'm just going to stick it in a folder. I wanted my inbox to be clear. When you get an email, and you should block out some time to check your emails. My boss and I I suppose when I look back at my senior management career, there was a lot of stuff that I stole from really great leaders, people I consider to be great leaders. And I just copied that. And one of my bosses, she used to check her email twice a day at 10:30 and 2:30, because that's when the post used to get delivered to her farm when she was growing up. Back in the days of 2 post deliveries a day. And she used to block out time, 20 minutes at 10:30 and 2:30 to check her email. And then she would decide what response was necessary. So sometimes she would then make a kind of put it on her task list. She would say like phone Colin, or she would, kind of add the action, and then she would delete the email if it needed deleting, or she would archive it if it was required by law to be kept. Most people, and for those of you really interested in the environment, there's so much email storage space that wastes so much electricity. So you should really get into the habit of deleting as many emails as you possibly can. There's so much stuff just gets archived or left in your inbox. Just delete it, empty your bin. Don't worry, there'll be a permanent record on the server if you ever need to find it somewhere, I'm sure. So yeah, that's the first thing, is set up rules. The second thing is, you could limit yourself to the number of emails you used to send a day. I did that with my team once. I think we decided on 8 a day would be a maximum. Listen, it was a whole heap of fun trying to get to 8 a day. And actually, I think we got it down to 6 a day in the end. But what we were trying to do was use email in the way that it should actually be used. And that was as a mechanism for kind of passing on information forward and other things like actions and stuff like that. So we got really, really good at it. So limit yourself to a number of emails a day, and then when you've reached your limit, like, right, well, I can't send any more. And stop copying people in, and definitely don't blind copy people in. That's some really sneaky shit right there. So don't do that. Like, I'm sending this email to you, and I'm sending it to another person that you don't know about. So don't do blind copying. And don't copy people in. Like, if they should receive it, they should be in the to field. And that's not permission for you to copy everybody in the copy and put them into the to field. Just really think about who needs to actually read this email, not receive it. That's different, right? Who needs to read the email? Who needs to read it? Right? And only send it to those people, and stop copying people in. Ultimately, what I want you to do, I want you to copy me a little bit here, because I got really good on email. It sounds horribly arrogant. But I did. It was one of the things. I remember my last boss in New Zealand, Tim, cracking guy, just a great fella to work with. Had the best stories. I've talked about him before. And he said, Colin, how is it that you've got 100? How is it that you've got no emails in your inbox and I've got 100 plus? I was like, Tim, how many emails a day do you send? He would be like, I don't know, between 10 and 50. I'm like, there you go. That's why you've got 100 emails in your inbox and I've got none. You don't need to do it. You don't need to email. Pick up the phone. The phone still works. You don't need to cover your arse all the time with this audit trail of information. If you're overwhelmed with your inbox right now, declare email bankruptcy. So send an email. Yes, I understand the irony. Send an email to everyone saying, dear everyone, every time I open my inbox, I'm overwhelmed. So I am deleting every single email in my inbox as of, and then give a time, like 12 o'clock on Monday. If you sent me something and it's urgent, I'll be blocking out between 3 and 5 o'clock every single day this week for you to phone me. Please don't send me an email. I'm changing my emails habit, and I urge you to do the same. Something like that. So email bankruptcy, I did that with the chief legal officer one, worked a dream, and she is now the proud owner of Inbox Zero. The last thing that I'll recommend is another rule. Something that I wrote about in Culture Hacks. I think I mentioned it on the podcast before, but worth repeating, is when you go on holiday. So you've got 2 things to do before you go on holiday, before you shut your laptop down. The first thing is to put your out of office on, right? And you're going to do that, and you're going to put in all of the dates. The second thing is you're going to write this message. Thank you so much for your email. However, I'm away now until date. And this works for a week or 2 weeks. As a result, every email will be sent to trash, as I don't want to be overwhelmed on my first day back from holiday. If your email is important, I'll be blocking out time between 3 and 5 o'clock every day when I return, and we'll be happy to chat to you then. And then, so that's going to be your out of office, set that, and then you're going to set up a rule. Every email that you receive between these dates goes to trash. Doesn't go to a folder, it goes to trash. Trust me, so I used to do this all the time, wrote about it in Culture Hacks. People have copied it, people have posted about it on LinkedIn and how effective it is, and which is great. I'm so glad it's working for people. Because you don't want to come back to all them emails. What are you going to do? You're not going to read them all. You're not going to, you might just delete them. Set up the rule, send them to delete. You're not overwhelmed when you return. You've got this beautiful empty inbox. You know what? Make it till 10:30 on the day that you return. Even better. Even better. Just change some habits. Become an example for others to follow. Talk about the habits you create around email. Pride yourself on inbox zero. You know, loads and loads of teams have these exercise challenges, which I think are fabulous initiatives. But you should also have these productivity challenges too. See how few meetings you can have in a week. See if you can get down to 5 meetings a week. How great would that be? Really challenge yourself. Make it fun. I'm doing air quotes here. You can't hear me. You can't see me, but you know what I mean by fun. But see you can have the fewest meetings in a week. See you can get the fewest emails or send the fewest emails. Have a little bit of lead table with you and your team. Listen, leadership is built in these small moments, and I've talked a lot about the fact that cultures are micro experiences. The fact of the matter is email undermines productive work every single day of the week. It drains attention. It adds to stress, and it's your fault. You're part of the problem. Unless you're doing something different and sharing with other people how it's transforming the way that you get work done. And on that note, that is your Culture and Coffee podcast for today. Have a fabulous day. Ta-ra for now.